This is the tale of the yellow ribbon. Jane wore a yellow ribbon around her neck every day, and I mean every day, rain or shine, whether it matched her outfit or not. It annoyed her best friend Johnny after a while. He was her next door neighbor and had known Jane since she was 3. When he was young, he had barely noticed the yellow ribbon, but now they were in high school together. It bothered him. "Why do you wear that yellow ribbon around your neck, Jane?" He'd ask her every day, but she wouldn't tell him. Still, in spite of this aggravation, Johnny thought she was cute. He asked her to the soda shop for an ice cream sundae. Then he asked her to watch him play in the football game. Then he started seeing her home. And come the spring, he asked her to the dance. Jane always said yes when he asked her out, and she always wore a yellow dress to match the yellow ribbon around her neck. It finally occurred to Johnny that he and Jane were going steady, and he still didn't know why she wore the yellow ribbon around her neck. So he asked her about it yet again, and yet again she did not tell him. "Maybe someday I'll tell you about it," she'd reply. Someday. That answer annoyed Johnny, but he shrugged it off, because Jane was so cute and fun to be with. Well, time flew past as it had a habit of doing, and one day Johnny proposed to Jane and was accepted. They planned a big wedding, and Jane hinted that she might tell him about the yellow ribbon around her neck on their wedding day. But somehow, what with the preparations and his beautiful bride and the lovely reception, Johnny never got around to asking Jane about it. And when he did remember, she got a bit teary-eyed and said, "We are so happy together. What difference does it make?" And Johnny decided she was right. Johnny and Jane raised a family of 4, with the usual ups and downs, laughters and tears. When their golden anniversary rolled around, Johnny once asked Jane about the yellow ribbon around her neck. It was the first time he brought it up since the week after their wedding. Whenever their children asked him about it, he'd always hush them, and somehow none of the kids had dared ask their mother. Jane gave Johnny a sad look and said, "Johnny, you've waited this long. You can wait a while longer." And Johnny agreed. It was not until Jane was on her deathbed a year later that Johnny, seeing his last chance slip away, asked Jane one final time about the yellow ribbon she wore around her neck. She shook her head a bit as persistence and then said, with a sad smile, "Okay, Johnny, you can go ahead and untie it." With shaking hands, Johnny fumbled for the knot and untied the yellow ribbon around his wife's neck. And Jane's head fell off. The tale of the 50-cent piece. There is a story told in Troy and Albany about a couple returning home from a trip to New England. They were driving home in a carriage and were somewhere near Spingletown when the light failed and they knew they would have to seek shelter for the night. The husband spied a light through the trees and turned their horse into a small lane leading up a hill. A pleasant little house stood at the crest, and an old man and his wife met the couple at the door. They were in night clothes and were obviously about to turn in, but they welcomed the travelers and offered them a room. The old woman bustled about making tea and offering freshly baked cakes. Then the travelers were shown to their room. The husband wanted to pay the old couple for their lodgings, but the old lady shook her head, and the old man refused any payment for such a small service to their fellow New Yorkers. The travelers awoke early and tiptoed out of the house, leaving a shiny 50-cent coin in the center of the kitchen table where the old couple could not miss it. The husband hitched up the horse, and they went a few miles before they broke their fast at a little restaurant in Spingletown. The husband mentioned the nice old couple to the owner of the restaurant, and the man turned pale. "Where did you say the house was?" he asked. The husband described the location in detail. "You must be mistaken," said the restaurant owner. "That house was destroyed 3 years ago by a fire that killed the Brown family." "I don't believe it," the husband said flatly. "Mr. and Mrs. Brown were alive and well last night." After debating for a few more minutes, the couple and the restaurant owner drove the carriage back out of town towards the old brown place. They turned into the lane, which was overgrown with weeds, and climbed the hill to the crest. There, they find a burned out shell of a house that had obviously not sheltered anyone for a long time. "I must have missed the track," said the husband. And then his wife gave a terrified scream and fainted into his arms. As he caught her, the husband looked into the ruin and saw a burnt table with a shiny 50-cent piece lying in the center. The Tale of the Two Heads. One day, a taxi driver received a call from a man who was staying in a hotel in the center of the city. He wanted to be picked up and transported to the airport. When the taxi driver arrived at the hotel, he had to wait more than an hour for the man to come out. When the passenger emerged from the hotel, he was carrying two large bags. Always friendly and willing to assist, the taxi driver got out and tried to help the man with his bags. To his surprise, the man refused and insisted on loading the bags into the trunk of the taxi by himself. Just then, the taxi driver noticed a horrible smell. It was the stench of rot and decay, and it was coming from the bags. When he got back into the taxi, he noticed something else that was strange. The passenger seemed very nervous, and he kept looking furtively over his shoulder. The taxi driver followed the route to the airport. On the way, the suspicious passenger asked him to stop at the corner because he wanted to make a phone call. The driver obeyed and waited patiently while the passenger got out and ran over to a nearby payphone. As he sat in the taxi, the driver could smell the terrible stench coming from the boot. The odor of decomposition was unmistakable. The nervous passenger returned and got into the back of the cab. The driver looked in the rearview mirror and noticed that the passenger was eyeing him suspiciously. By the time they reached the airport, the passenger was extremely nervous and sweating profusely. He asked the taxi driver to wait for him in the parking lot because he was worried that he may have missed his plane. Then the passenger got out of the taxi and hurried off. The taxi driver was sitting there for a few minutes when he suddenly realized that the passenger had forgotten to take his bags with him. They were still in the boot of the car. The smell was becoming so terrible that people who were passing by the taxi had to hold their noses. The driver realized that the mysterious passenger was not going to return and decided to find out what was in the bags. He got out of the car, and when he opened the boot, he was almost overpowered by the terrible smell. With trembling hands, he opened the bags, and inside, he found two rotting heads, a head of lettuce and a head of cauliflower. This is the tale of the cell phone. There was a woman who had a 6-year-old son. One day, she bought a new mobile phone. When she came home from work, she started cooking dinner and left her phone down on the kitchen table. Her son came into the kitchen and saw the phone. He asked his mother if he could play with it. She told him that he
Mm-hmm.
could, as long as he did not call anyone or delete any text messages. Of course, the boy agreed and went off to his bedroom to play with the phone. Around 10 p.m. that night, she went upstairs to tuck her son and found him fast asleep on his bed. The new cell phone was lying on the ground beside the bed. She picked it up and began browsing through the settings to make sure he had not deleted anything. She noticed some minor changes. He had changed the theme, the background, and had given her a new ringtone. She noticed that he had taken some pictures with the cell phone. She opened the images folder and browsed through them. How cute, she thought. He had been taking pictures of himself. Then she came across the last photo in the folder. When she first saw it, she couldn't quite believe it. Were her eyes playing tricks on her? It was a photograph of her son lying asleep on her bed. But the disturbing thing was what was lurking in the far left corner of the picture. It seemed to show the left side of a creepy old woman's face. The Vanishing Hitchhiker. A boy and his friend were on their way to a dance, driving down a lonely country road. They saw a young girl standing at the side of the road with her thumb out. The boys stopped to ask her if she'd like a ride. She asked them if they'd take her home, but they told her they were on their way to a dance. They asked the girl if she'd like to come too,
Mm-hmm.
and she accepted their invitation. So they all got in the car and she sat in the back seat. It was a very cold night, and she borrowed one of their overcoats. They danced all night, and when it got late, she asked them to take her home. So they drove to her house and stopped and let her out. Suddenly, one of the
Let's
boys
go.
remembered he had forgotten to ask her for his overcoat. His friend said, "Wait until tomorrow. We'll come back." The next morning, the boys returned to look for the girl. They found her mother, a very old woman, at home. She said that the girl was her daughter, but she'd been dead for 12 years. She had been killed in a car accident at the same corner. The old woman pointed to a cemetery down the road. The boys didn't believe her, and they went into the cemetery and looked around. Then they saw the overcoat draped over a headstone. Engraved in the tombstone was the girl's name, and the date of her death was exactly 12 years ago to the day. The clown statue. A few years ago, there was a wealthy couple who had two young children, a boy and a girl. The family lived in a large house in Newport Beach, California. After taking care of their kids all week, the mother and father decided that they needed a break. So they booked a table for dinner at a nice restaurant. That evening, they called a teenage girl they knew and arranged for her to come over and babysit their children while they were out. When the babysitter arrived, the parents told her to fix supper for their kids and put them to bed. After that, you can just watch TV and help yourself to anything in the fridge, the father said. "And if you wouldn't mind," said the mother, "could you watch TV in our bedroom?" The kids have been having nightmares recently, so if you hear them crying, you can just go in and calm them down." The
Mm-hmm.
babysitter happily agreed, and the parents left for their dinner date. The girl gave the children some milk and cookies, then ushered them upstairs to bed. She started to read them a bedtime story, and before long, the little boy and girl were fast asleep. After tucking them in, she switched off the lights and went to watch TV. When the babysitter walked into the parents' bedroom and sat down, she noticed that there was a creepy looking clown statue standing in the corner of the room. She tried to ignore it, but it looked so eerie and disturbing that it sent a chill down her spine. She felt as though its eyes were staring straight at her while she watched TV. As time passed, the babysitter started to feel more and more uneasy about the clown statue. Whenever she glanced at it, she got the unsettling feeling that it had moved ever so slightly. Finally, the clown statue began to freak her out so much that she couldn't handle it any longer. She decided to go downstairs and phone the parents. When she dialed the number they had left for her, the mother answered. "Hi, it's me," said the babysitter. "Everything's fine. The kids are fast asleep in bed, but I was just wondering, would it be okay if I watch TV downstairs?" "Of course," replied the mother, "but why?" "I know it sounds silly," laughed the girl. "The clown statue is really creeping me out." "The clown statue?" asked the father. "Yeah, the clown statue in your bedroom," the girl replied. The phone went silent for a moment. "Listen to me very carefully," said the father. "Take the children and get out of the house. We will call the police. Go now." "What's wrong?" asked the girl. The father gulped and replied, "We don't have a clown statue." For a second, the babysitter just stood there, stunned. Then she dropped the phone and raced upstairs and grabbed the children. Carrying one under each arm, she raced downstairs again and fled out into the street. Huddled on the sidewalk, comforting the two children, the babysitter looked up at the window and saw something that made her scream out in horror. Peeking through a gap in the curtains was the white, painted face of a clown. It stared at her for a moment, then sank back into the darkness. Within minutes, the police arrived and cautiously entered the house. In the upstairs bedroom, they found a man dressed in a clown suit. When they arrested him, they found a knife concealed in his costume. The clown turned out to be a mentally disturbed small man who was a convicted murderer and cold-blooded killer. The evil man had been stalking the family for months, lurking in their attic during the daytime and coming out to sneak around the house at night. For weeks, the children had been complaining about a clown statue that stood in their room and watched them sleep, but the parents just dismissed this as nightmares. The Cursed Doll. There was a little girl who really loved dolls. She had a big collection of them in her bedroom. One day, while she was browsing through a shop on her own, she spotted a really beautiful doll. It would make a perfect addition to her collection. She only hoped she had enough money to buy it. "How much is that doll, ma'am?" she asked the old woman behind the counter. "This doll is not for sale," replied the woman. "But it's so beautiful," said the girl. "I really want it." The old woman became irritated. "I told you it's not for sale," she said. "Why not?" persisted the girl. "Because this doll is cursed." "Well, that's okay. I don't mind. I'm not going to sell it to you, but if you really must have it, go ahead and take it. It's yours. But if something bad happens, don't blame me." "Yes, thank you," said the girl, smiling as she grabbed the doll and walked out of the shop. The little girl was so delighted to get the doll for free that she ran all the way home, carrying it in her arms. When she got home to her apartment building, she went into the lobby. It was deserted. She stood there waiting for the elevator to arrive. The doors opened and she stepped inside, clutching her new doll tightly. The doors closed, but the elevator did not move. The little girl got scared and began trembling with fear. "OMG," she thought to herself. "Is this the curse of the doll?" Suddenly, she felt the doll move in her arms. Ever so slowly, its head turned to face her. The little girl wanted to scream, but she couldn't make a sound. The doll's eyes fluttered and opened. It stared at her with its lifeless glass eyes. Then its mouth opened and it said, "Push the button to go up, dummy." The girl in the red dress. "Granny locked me in my room and she won't let me out. She says it's because I was bad. Sometimes I do bad things. Ever since my mommy went away, Granny says my mommy is in heaven. I don't know how she got there. I can still remember my mommy. I remember her long black hair and her dark eyes. I remember her red lips and her white teeth. I remember her soft skin. I remember the way she smelled. Her red dress still smells like her. It's hanging in the wardrobe in her bathroom. Granny keeps Mommy's room locked. She says I'm not allowed in there, but I know where she hides the key. Sometimes, when Granny falls asleep, I sneak in there and smell Mommy's dress. I have a friend called Marianne. She lives across the street. Sometimes she comes over to my house to play. She came over today. We were playing dolls. Granny told me, "Don't go into your mother's room." "Okay," I said. When Granny took her nap, I told Mary Ann, "Let's play dress up." I took the key from Granny's hiding place and unlocked the door to Mommy's bedroom. When we went inside, it was almost too dark to see. "This is where my mommy lives," I said. "You don't have a mommy," Mary Ann said. That made me angry. I opened the wardrobe and took out the red silk dress. "This is my mommy's dress," I said. I held it up to show her. "It stinks," Marianne said. "No, it doesn't," I said. "It smells like flowers." "It smells like dead things," she said. That made me even more angry. "Who's that?" asked Marianne. She was pointing at a picture. "That's my mommy," I said. "Isn't she beautiful?" "She's ugly," Marianne said. "She has creepy eyes and her teeth are weird." "No, she hasn't," I said. "She looks like the most beautiful girl in the world." "She looks like a dead thing," Marianne said. That made me the angriest of all. I don't remember what happened then. I think I heard Marianne screaming. I don't remember why. It was dark and I almost couldn't see. I couldn't hear anything except Marianne screaming. I think something bad happened. Then I remember Granny
Oh my
shouting
god.
at me. She was crying too. She took the red dress off me. She was really rough and she kept hitting me. I was crying too. Granny fetched a washcloth and wiped the blood off my face. She told me over and over how bad I was. Then she dragged me all the way upstairs and locked me in my room. I looked out the window and saw Granny in the backyard. She was burying something with a shovel. I must have done something really bad. Knock. The last man on earth sat alone in a room. There was a knock on the door. Intruder alert. It was the middle of the night and I was in the bedroom trying to relax. I changed the channel on the TV and saw that the local news was on. At the bottom of the screen, there was a breaking news alert: murderer on the loose, hiding in the vicinity. Police warning everyone to be on the alert. Suspect is armed and dangerous. I was drifting off to sleep when I was awakened by a strange noise downstairs. It sounded like there was someone in the house. At that moment, my heart began beating fast and I broke into a cold sweat. Straining my ears to listen, I thought I heard another noise. It was the sound of a door creaking. It wasn't my imagination. There was an intruder in the house. I've got to get out of here fast, I thought. I slipped off the bed as quietly as possible and crept towards the window. My body was shaking with fear, and I was hoping I didn't make any noise. Just then, I heard faint footsteps making their way up the stairs. It sounded like more than one person. At any second, they would burst through the door. I had to get away. I climbed out of the window and onto the garage roof, moving as fast as I could without making too much noise. At the edge of the roof, I grabbed the drain pipe and lowered myself down until I dropped into the garden. As I paused, I looked up at the window I had just escaped from and saw the lights go on. That was close, I thought. A chill ran down my spine as I thought about what would have happened if they caught me. I made my way to the bottom of the garden and into the woods. Once I was safely hidden by the trees, I broke into a run. I pushed onwards, stumbling through the darkness, moving through the undergrowth until I came to another housing estate. Clutching my knife, I headed towards another house. The red spot. One night, a young girl was sleeping in her bed when a spider crawled across her face. It stopped for a few minutes on her left cheek, then it went on its way. When she woke up the next morning and
Oh
looked
my
in the
god.
mirror, she noticed a red spot on her cheek. "What's this?" she asked her mother. "It looks like a spider bite," her mother replied. "It will go away. Just don't scratch it." Soon, the small red spot grew into a big red boil. "Look at it now," the girl said. "It's getting bigger." "That sometimes happens," her mother said. "It's coming to a head." In a few days, the red spot was even larger. "Look at it now," the girl said. "It hurts so much and it makes me look so ugly." "We'll have the doctor look at it," her mother said. "Maybe it's infected." But the doctor couldn't see the girl until the next day. That night, she decided to take a nice, relaxing bath. As she lay soaking in the warm water, the boil suddenly burst.
Out poured a swarm of tiny spiders from the eggs their mother had laid in her cheek.
The Roblox lover. There was a little girl who loved to play Roblox. She played every morning before school and after school. She would play before bed and during dinner. Some nights she didn't go to bed at all. One day she really wanted some Robux but didn't have any money. She asked her mother, but her mother denied and said she already spends too much time playing. She was desperate, so she decided she would sell whatever she can so that she can buy the Robux. An old creepy woman approached her and asked her, "What are you selling?" The girl mostly had used toys and clothes to sell. The old woman wasn't interested in toys or clothes. She asked the girl if she was desperate for money, and the little girl said yes. She would sell an arm and a leg for Robux. The old woman smiled and revealed that she was in need of an arm and a leg, and so the purchase was made. The little girl went home excited and ready to play and spend her Robux. When she got home, she realized she no longer had hands to play. Two sisters. There were two sisters named Mary and Emily. Mary and Emily were playing dolls and giggling when all of a sudden Mary walks into the room and asks Emily what's so funny. And then there were two Marys. What happened to NNT? There was a
Hello,
YouTuber
friend.
known as NNT. She loved making videos for her fans. One day, while editing a video, she heard a knock. The knock was coming from inside her computer. She thought it must have been her imagination. And so she unplugged her PC to ease her fears. But the knocking continued even when the PC was unplugged. She jumped out of her chair and leaned closer to the PC. She thought maybe a mouse or small creature was stuck behind the screen. As she approached the screen, a long, creepy hand grabbed NNT into the PC. Later that day, a video was uploaded to her channel with the caption titled, "Help Me." But what played on the video was just a black screen. But if you listen closely, you could hear the sound of knocking faintly for help. The babysitter. There was a little girl named Rose. Rose was in need of a babysitter. The parents were going out for dinner and hired a new sitter named
Hello.
Sarah. Sarah arrived on time and with a smile on her face. The parents left her instructions and left for dinner. Sarah and Rose had fun playing games and baking cookies. Even though Sarah seemed quiet and reserved, she was quite fun. About 30 minutes later, the parents received a call from the babysitter saying her car broke down and that she'll be arriving late. The parents dropped the phone as they screamed in fear, wondering who was the babysitter that was left alone with Rose. 9. There was a little girl named Lena who jumped up and down all day on a trampoline, repeating the number 888 as she jumped. Her neighbor Amy came over and told Lena that she was weird and annoying for jumping all day and repeating the number 888. And how can that possibly be any fun? Lena told her it's very fun and that she should try her trampoline for herself. So Amy jumped on the trampoline and screamed as she fell through a trap door that led to a pit. Lena smiled, closed the trap door, covered it with the trampoline, and began to jump up and down, repeating this time the number 999. Smile. I was washing my hands at the sink when my reflection in the mirror creepily smiled at me. Knock, knock. Knock, knock. Who's there? Your grandma. My grandma is dead. Red. The big bad wolf waited excitedly in Grandma's bed, ready for dinner to arrive. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door, and then the door opened. The wolf hungrily waited in bed under the covers for her to approach. The footsteps grew heavier as they approached the bed, and as the wolf pulled down the covers, ready to pounce, an axe came down and chopped the wolf's head clean off. You see, Little Red's older sister came back to avenge her as promised. Who's in my bed? A father went to say goodnight to his 7-year-old son, very well knowing that if he didn't, his son would have trouble sleeping. It was a nightly routine between them. He entered the dimly lit room where his son waited under his blanket. With the first glance, the father could tell there was something unusual about his son tonight, but couldn't put his finger on it. He looked the same, but he had a grin that drew from ear to ear. You okay, buddy? The father asked. The son nodded, still with a grin, before saying, Daddy, check for monsters under my bed. The father chuckled a bit before getting on his knees to check on to satisfy his son. There, under the bed, pale and afraid, was his son, his real son. He whispered, Daddy, there's someone on my bed. A mother's call. A daughter was in her room upstairs doing her homework when suddenly she heard her mother call to come down for dinner. She jumped onto her feet and began making her way towards the stairs. But before she even took a step, hands grabbed her and pulled her into the laundry room besides the staircase. She panicked before realizing it was her mother, her real mother, eyes watery and bloodshot. Don't go down there, honey. I heard it too. My grandma is a great dancer. Mom says she passed away years ago, but I always see her dancing in the basement. I woke up to hear knocking on glass. At first, I thought it was the window until I heard it come from the mirror again. Hide and seek. This story is about two brothers who were playing hide and seek in their home while their parents were visiting their friends nearby. As the older boy turned towards the wall and began counting, he heard his brother scampering around, searching for a place to hide. He searched everywhere but couldn't locate his brother when he heard a scraping sound from the cupboard. He called out to his younger brother, but there was no response, only an eerie silence. He opened the cupboard slowly and bent down to peer closer when a white, icy cold hand pulled him back. He then heard his younger brother calling out to him from behind, and frightened, the boy tried to break free from the grip of the icy cold hand. Both the brothers then rushed out of the room and out of the house, screaming. What if the hand had pulled the boy inside the cupboard?
I always thought my cat had a staring problem. She always seemed fixated on my face. Until one day when I realized that she was always looking just behind me.
Big. I have a friend that is very tall and hairy and lives in the woods. His feet are huge and he's kinda smelly, but I don't mind. I leave him some snacks like candy, and in return, he leaves me fresh fruit. Daddy says men are searching and hunting for a mean monster called a Sasquatch in the forest. I better let my friend know to be safe and keep an eye out for the Sasquatch.
There was a picture in my phone of me sleeping. I live alone.
Kitty. I lay in bed beside my kitty, her warm fur against my cheek as I sleep. The door creaks open and there's my kitty, meowing as she enters the room. If that's my kitty, then who or what is laying beside me? I forgot to grab something. I'll be right back, said Mom. As she rounded the corner, out of sight, the cashier began ringing up our groceries. Mommy, the man at the top of the stairs says you should leave. You get home tired after a long day at school and ready for a relaxing evening at home while your parents are out. You reach for the light switch, but another hand is already there. Window. I jump into bed underneath my blanket, shivering. I look over to where a cool breeze is coming in through my window. That's strange. I don't remember opening the window on this cold winter night. I go over and shut it closed. As I'm about to climb into bed, an unfamiliar voice says, "Why did you close the window?"